Paul correct. Servant in Isaiah 52:53 dies to pay for our sin, stated 10 times. 53:8 that he was cut off from the land of the living for the wrongdoing of my people to whom the blow was due.
So you didn't read it right. Where is the word payment? I mean, you do find the idea that Jesus paid the price in Paul's letters, but let's translate it. Mi pesha ami, this is the last four Hebrew words of Isaiah 3. Mi pesha ami negalamo. Do you speak Hebrew? For the transgressions of my people, they were stricken. They were stricken. So what happens is you change it, just like why in Isaiah 48 is the word lamo translated correctly but incorrectly in 53. And again, just keep relying on your King James, your New International Version, and you will remain in the church. Keep quoting from the Talmud, keep quoting from the Radak out of context. That's exactly how you stay in the church. Exactly.
Paul correct. Servant rises from dead. Dead Sea Scroll 53:11, he will see light and be satisfied. Light idiom for life. See Job 33:28. He has redeemed my soul from going to the pit, and my life shall see the light.
So all I would encourage, I mean, you quoted Isaiah 53:11. Whoever you are, thank you. That's the point. What does the text say? How will the servant vindicate the just from any? The text says, Bidato yatzik sadik avdi larabim. Really carefully, bidato, what is das? By his knowledge, my servant will vindicate the just for many. By his knowledge. It doesn't say bidamo. It doesn't say by his blood. By his knowledge, right? The Jewish people are a light to the nations. I just say this. Instead of going to Pastor Google and copying and pasting, forget that. I mean, don't you want to be free of these shackles? Don't you want to break free of, don't you want to get out of prison? So in order to do that, just go, you know what, forget Pastor Google or Rabbi Google. Just go to Rabbi Isaiah. And the text, Isaiah 53, verse 9 through 12, the last four passages, God is speaking, and he's explaining by what means is the servant. It's the second message of mention of the servant in these 15 passages. The servant will vindicate the just for many, not by his blood, not by the cross, not by Calvary, but by his knowledge, a light to the nations. Just pay attention to that. So look at the text, take a deep breath, and find your way into the mind of Isaiah. It'll help.
Thank you. 100, 1001000, that's the name. Was it common for Second Temple Jewish interpretations to be a little out there? How odd would less straightforward interpretations be, i.e. Paul B? Sorry, by i.e. Paul B. So did you get the question, or did you want me to repeat it?
I just would say this. So I think I'm going to rephrase what he's asking. And I'm taking a liberty here, but I kind of could sniff this out, and it's a very fair question. I think the question essentially, isn't there an idea that you can have a homily on the text that's not the plain meaning of the text? Isn't that something that could be found in Judaism? The answer is absolutely. But 2 points. Ein mikra yotze elo midei pshuto. A text can never depart from its, you know the translation called the pshita. What does that mean? Well, you've heard of the pshita. Well, that's one simple word, which means pshat. It's simple, plain meaning. A homily can't do violence to the plain, simple meaning of the text. So, you couldn't say, that God would restore the Jewish people from Jeremiah chapter 29, verse 10, and ultimately there be another restoration, but the other restoration is spelled out very clearly in Hosea chapter 3, verse 4 and 5. So you can't do violence to it. Number two is just a careful point. There's a difference between a homily and apologetics. And this people can blur this line repeatedly. Homily is, a speech you make from the pulpit, but apologetics, where I want to convince you of something, you can only use material that you and I agree on. I mean, imagine a Mormon trying to convince you to join the Church of the Latter-day Saints. And you ask, well, why? And he says, well, look at the Book of Mormon. You'd go, well, that's not persuasive because you don't agree on those texts. So it's very important that in apologetics you look at the plain meaning. The Book of Romans is an apologetic work, and it's misappropriating the text and doing violence to the plain meaning of the text, and that's deeply problematic.
I think you hit the nail on the head as well last week when you brought up Platonism and how influential Platonic philosophy was at this time, especially by these authors, because even the church fathers start to do to their own texts in a very spiritual manner, not the plain reading, and they start to misappropriate their own literature due to their more ascetic ways of philosophy. So eventually you have guys like Augustine coming in going, well, the book of Revelation, no. This is all symbolic. It completely is there's no actual meaning to what's being said here. In many ways, it's very spiritual. And they start to futurize a lot of these books that actually intended to have late first century, early second century significance. And I find it ironic that that kind of philosophy creeps in to both Jewish thought as well as Christian thought at the time.
The claim of the church is that there are 365 prophecies in the Old Testament that clearly speak about Jesus. Does that sound familiar to you, Derek? Right? That's the claim. I'm not strawmanning this. The claim is not in the Talmud. The claim is that there are explicit prophecies in the Old Testament that all point to Jesus, and therefore you should get baptized. And then we look at these proofs, and what we find is 365 scandals. And then we do the arithmetic. 365 times 0, you know the rest of it. That's why these are not persuasive. What we're doing in the church is making a fantastic claim. Doesn't mean it isn't true, but fantastic claims require reasonable evidence. When we look up this evidence, we not only don't find what the claim is, what was advertised, it's scandalous. You can't then go, well, there were Second Temple Jews that came up with homilies that didn't. That's not the point. You're selling me on this. If Amazon would ship you something that you didn't order, but charge, you'd send it back immediately and complain. Send it back.
Thank you so much. Rick Mueller, how did the pagans view Judaism? Was it seen as exotic, therefore novel, and more interesting than the old-fashioned Greco-Roman pantheon?
So you're asking about how did the pagans? Obviously, it varied. The word pagan just means people who didn't live in the city, lived in the suburbs. So I don't know what period you're referring to, but in the Greco-Roman world, I think that generally speaking, that Judaism enjoyed a lot of respect certainly in the Roman Empire. In the ancient world, they knew that Alexander the Great, who they revered, had a relationship with the Jews. They knew the Jews were a people of antiquity. They really appreciated that. And they didn't appreciate the emperors of Rome frequently, and they saw in Judaism something completely novel and unique. And the anti-Semitism that you see about you that is not what was in the empire. The Jews went to war with Rome over issues like taxes and so on. So I think your question you're asking is very, very broad. I think that in the Roman Empire there was a general respect for the Jews. Incidentally, Judaism was a licit religion. Jews did not have to bring sacrifices to the gods as non-Jews were required to. They were off the hook. They had a dispensation. And that's why, in truth, although the church fathers did not appreciate the Jews, the ante-Nicene church fathers, it didn't matter what Ignatius or Irenaeus said about Jews because they had no power. It was just rhetorical. After Constantine's conversion to Christianity in the 4th century, And after the church becomes a licit religion, and by the end of the 4th century, the official religion of the empire, so then the Jews were in a lot of trouble, because then what was said by the end of the 5th century, the 4th century, I don't know, it could be half of the empire was Christian, perhaps, I don't know, it was large. Now the Jews are in a lot of trouble. So earlier on in the 1st century, I think the Jews were viewed, we don't have a lot of literature on this, but it seems that the Jews were viewed rather positively.
And I imagine the context of who's authoring or writing at the time, because I know there were polemics that were going on. But yeah, I think there were sympathizers for sure, meaning they were attracted to the way. And oftentimes you had these people we call God-fearers, a category that's inscribed on synagogues and such, of those who were non-Jews finding attraction to this religion. And it wasn't like, I'm not going to say that there weren't possibly historically some people trying to proselytize, but it was not the modus operandi of this particular religion to go around and seek converts. There is a jab in the Gospels, whether that's historical or not, of Pharisees doing something like that. Maybe not. Hard for me to trust, but it could be. But there's not that agenda to proselytize like you find deeply embedded in Christianity.
The issue that sophisticated thinkers would have had with Judaism is, how could you possibly believe in the physical resurrection of the dead? That was a big one. Cicero's 6th volume of the Republic, where he goes off on this. What are you talking about? No one in the ancient world thought that. Like, who would want to return back to your wretched body? And Socrates happily drank the hemlock, knowing that he would be soon rid of his physical body. That's why Christianity is the first one to incorporate their demigod resurrects from the dead rather than ascends. Everyone ascends, but Christianity is going to go hard on this because it really does have to synchronize Judaism with Christianity. So it's not good enough for Jesus just to ascend. And even Paul's iteration, where he does not mention an empty tomb, that's not good enough. And we're going to see in the Gospels where Jesus physically resurrects, not so much in Mark because we don't have an authentic Mark with the disciples, but certainly Matthew, certainly in Luke, and certainly in John, we need to push this point. Jesus, the physical resurrection, touches flesh, doubting Thomas. So that's why Christianity is alone in having its God resurrecting from the dead rather than ascending like Romulus did, as an example.
Isaiah 49. I checked context very carefully. Servant as remnant doesn't fit, because then the remnant must save the remnant. Only fit is God's firstborn son. See Isaiah 9:6. For a child will be born to us.
Isaiah 49 distinguishes the servant. What's the difference between the servant and the rest of Israel? Just think about that. What's the difference between, what does the servant even mean? Avdi, my servant, right? So servant doesn't mean every Jew. Doesn't mean whoever, fill in the blank, whatever your favorite Jew is. It means those who are loyal to God. Isaiah 49, verse 6. Let's stay with the passage. What is the role of the servant? The servant is the righteous remnant of the Jews. Those who are loyal. What do they have to do? Lahokim es shiftei Yaakov. They have to restore the tribes of Jacob. And go to the end of the verse. I'm using the verse you're picking, and to be an Or Lagoyim. So let's figure this out. The remnant of the Jews who are loyal to God rather than the rest of the Jews have 2 mandates. Mandate number 1 is they must bring back the rest of the Jews who are lost. Doesn't mean just the 10 tribes. It means the Jews who are not that religious, who are not committed to the faith. Number 1. Number 2 is the Gentiles. So this is an argument that Christians always make. How could Israel save Israel? It doesn't say that. What it says is that the servant means the remnant has to bring back the rest of the Jews. 2 has to bring back the Gentiles. And that argument is made frequently, all the time. Israel can't save Israel, therefore it must be speaking about Christ. Nonsense. It's the remnant. Please, I want to keep these answers short. Read Zephaniah 3:12 through 16. If you read Zephaniah 3:12 through 16, you'll get it all there, because that prophet will live maybe 2 centuries after Isaiah. describes as vividly as possible. So good point. Isaiah 49:6, exactly correct. If you enjoyed this program, please like and subscribe.
אדון עולם אשר מלך בטרם כל יציר נברא לעת נעשה בחפצו כל